Conditional statements and logical operators. Conditional statements are used to determine whether or not certain commands are executed based on a condition. The most basic form of a conditional statement is an if statement. Now let's look at an example of it. And then if example 1. An if example look like the following. If some condition, then some commands, followed by an end. So how if statement works is, if whatever condition in here is true, then these commands will be executed. If the condition is false, then these commands will be skipped and nothing will be executed. Now let's look at an example. If I want to say 3 is less than 4. So I want to test for the condition that 3 is less than 4. And if this is true, I want to display to the user using the disp function that 3 is less than 4. I can save and run my script. And there you go, output. The output is 3 is less than 4. Now before we continue with conditional statements, we should talk about some relational operators and logical operators. When MATLAB evaluates a condition, you either return true, which is symbolized by 1, or return false, which is symbolized by 0. Now relational operators are used to compare two or more values. The relational operators that are in MATLAB are less than or equals to, greater than or equals to, and not equal to. For example, if I were to say 5 is less than 8, this is a true statement, so MATLAB will output 1. If I say 2 is greater than 5, this is a false statement, so MATLAB will output 0. So this is how relational operators work. In addition to relational operators, MATLAB also provides logical operators. Logical operators allow you to combine different expressions and test for their values. The three most commonly used logical operators are AND, OR, and NOT. The AND is the following symbol using the ampersand. So the AND will return true if both conditions are true. For example, if I were to say 5 is less than 6 and 4 is less than 8. Now this statement is true. 5 less than 6 is true, and 4 is less than 8 is also true. So the two arguments are true. The two statements are true. So AND will return, in this case, will return true. If I were to change the above expression and say 4 is greater than 8. Now 5 is less than 6 is still true, but 4 is greater than 8. This is false. So I have true and false. And in this case, will return false. So this is how the AND operator works. The OR operator is a vertical bar, which is on top of your return key. The OR symbol the OR statement operator will return true if either condition is true. So for example, if I replace AND with OR, this will return true because 5 is less than 6, which is true, and 4 is less than 8, which is also true. However, if I were to try 5 is less than 6 and 4 is greater than 8, because 5 less than 6 is true, OR will just return true. It does not care whether or not 4 is greater than 8. As long as one of the conditions is true. And that's why you get 1. And finally, you have the NOT. The NOT operator returns true if the condition is false, returns false if the condition is true. For example, I know that 3 is less than 4. That's why MATLAB gives me 1, which is true. If I put a NOT, 3 is less than 4. You reverse the true and give me a false. Similarly, if I were to say 4 is greater than 5, which is false, and I add a NOT 4 is greater than 5, this will give me true. So NOT invert whatever value you get. If you get true, NOT will give you false. If you get false, NOT will give you true. Now that we know how relational and logical operators work, we can go back to our conditional statements and expand on its functionality. Now let's look at another example of an if statement. So I want to test for the value of a variable x. If x is less than 20, I want to output x is less than 20. So I write if, and here's my condition, x is less than 20. Then I want to display to the user x is less than 20. And make sure to add an end after every if. Okay, now in order to run my script, all I have to do is assign x to a value. So for example, if I assign x equals to 5, and then run my script, if example 2, I get my output, x is less than 20, which is correct. Now if I were to assign x to the value of 30, and run my script again, I'll get no output whatsoever. That is because x is now 30, and 30 is not less than 20. So this statement is false. When this statement is false, this command will just simply be skipped. Now we can further enhance our if statement using logical operators. Let's look at another example. If example 2b. Now I would like to test for the value of x and y at the same time. So I will have the following. If x is less than 20 and y is greater than 5, then I want to display to the user the statement x is less than 20 and y is greater than 5. Disp less than 20 and y is greater than 5. And now I can test my if statement by assigning the values of x and y. So I assign x equals to 10 and my y equals to 8. If I were to run my if statement, if example 2b, I will get the output. X is less than 20 and y is greater than 5, which is the condition I tested for. Now if I were to assign y to, say, the value 3, and run my if statement again, I'll get no output. That is because 3 is not greater than 5. So this condition evaluates to false, and this statement is simply skipped. Now, so far all we have tested for is one condition. If something is true, then we do something. We can further enhance our if statement by adding a else if. Let's look at an example. So I want to test for the value of x. If x is less than 5, I want to display to the user the text x is less than 5. However, if x is greater than 5, I want to display to the user that x is greater than 5. Now, how can I do both at the same time in one if statement? I do the following. If x is less than 5, then I use this function to say x is less than 5. Now, instead of ending it with an end, I can enhance my if statement by using an else if. So else if x is greater than 5, I'll display to the user, x is greater than 5. Now I can add an end. So what this statement is saying is that if x is less than 5, I'll display x is less than 5. Or else, if x is greater than 5, then I'll display x is greater than 5. So when you have an if statement, you can always add an else if statement to test for another condition. Now, if you have an else if statement with an if, only one of these two things will execute it. Both will not execute at the same time. So for example, let's assign x to 10. If I were to run my if example 3, it would tell me that x is greater than 5. If I were to assign x to 3 and run my example again, it would tell me that x is less than 5. However, you will never see these two statements execute at the same time. Now let's look back at our example. So we tested for x, whether or not x is less than 5 and greater than 5. Recall that we have a third possibility for x. X could equal to 5. Now, I know that there's only 3 possibilities: less than 5, greater than 5, and equal to 5. So I can test for the third possibility, or by simply saying else. Display x is equal to 5. So what the else statement does is, it's last thing to be executed if nothing above it is true. So if x is not less than 5 and x is not greater than 5, then we know for a fact that x is equal to 5. We don't even need to test for the condition. All we have to do is simply put an else, and else will be executed. For example, if x equals to 5, and I run my if example, I'll get x is equal to 5. So this is how if statements work. Note that you can add as many else if statements as you like. I can have more else if statements. Else if da 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 da. Else if some other condition, and finally end with an else. Now you may have as many else if statements as you would like. However, you can only have one else at the very end. Also, please do not forget to add an end after if statement. If you don't, you have a lot of errors.